The wind moved slowly across the prairie that afternoon, carrying with it the dry smell of dust, sage, and distant rain that might or might not ever reach the valley. The town of Red Creek sat quietly beneath a wide western sky, the buildings worn and sun-bleached, their wooden fronts leaning a little as if tired from standing through too many seasons. Wagons rolled through now and then, horses stamped their hooves in front of the saloon, and the blacksmith's hammer rang in slow, steady beats. It was the sort of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and strangers were noticed the moment they arrived. That was why nearly every pair of eyes in town had turned toward the stagecoach when it creaked to a halt in front of the post office just after noon. The door swung open, and a young woman stepped down slowly, gripping the railing as though the ground might shift beneath her boots. She was smaller than most had expected, wrapped in a faded blue traveling dress that had clearly seen many days on the road. Dust clung to the hem, and her dark hair had been pinned up hastily beneath a simple bonnet. Her name was Clara Whitmore, though no one in Red Creek knew it yet. The stage driver tossed down her single trunk and tipped his hat with a sympathetic look before climbing back onto his seat. The horses snorted and stamped impatiently. Clara stood there for a moment, staring at the unfamiliar town that was supposed to become her new life. A few men lounging outside the saloon exchanged glances. "Must be her," one muttered, "the May, lord or bride." Another replied, leaning back in his chair. Clara pretended not to hear them, though their voices carried clearly in the quiet street. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her small satchel. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles based on a handful of letters from a man she had never met in person. Those letters had been kind, careful, steady like the handwriting of someone who thought before speaking. His name was Jacob Hale, but Jacob Hale wasn't there. Clara waited a few minutes longer, watching the empty road stretching beyond the town as if the man might appear at any moment, riding hard through the dust. No one came. The men by the saloon began whispering again. Maybe he changed his mind, or maybe she ain't what he expected. A thin man with greasy hair and a crooked grin stood up from the porch rail and sauntered toward her. His boots scraped against the wooden walkway, slow and deliberate. "Well now," he said, tipping his hat just enough to show yellowed teeth, "looks like you're waiting on someone." Clara forced a polite smile. "Yes, sir, I'm looking for Jacob Hale." The man chuckled softly. "You and half the county." His companions laughed behind him. Clara felt her stomach tighten, but she held her ground. "Do you know where I can find him?" The man stepped a little closer than necessary. "Might be we could help you pass the time until he shows." Clara took a small step back. "I'm sure he'll be here soon." The man reached for the handle of her trunk. "Tell you what," he said, "why don't I take this over to the saloon while you—" A deep voice cut through the air behind them. "Take one more step toward her, and you'll lose the hand." The street fell silent. Hoofbeats had approached so quietly that no one noticed until the horse stopped in the middle of the road. The rider sat tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered and sun-burned, his hat pulled low over eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Dust coated the long trail coat he wore, and a rifle rested in a leather scabbard along the saddle. Jacob Hale had arrived. He swung down from the horse with a calm, controlled motion, tying the reins to the hitching post before stepping onto the wooden walkway. His gaze never left the man standing too close to Clara. "Touch her," he said quietly, "and you'll answer to me." The words were spoken without raising his voice, but something about them made the crooked, grinned man step back immediately. Jacob moved to Clara's side, placing himself between her and the others. "You must be Miss Whitmore," he said gently. Clara blinked in surprise at the sudden change in tone. His voice was steady now, almost careful. "Yes," she said softly. "I'm Jacob Hale, For a moment neither of them spoke. Clara studied his face, recognizing pieces of the man she had imagined from his letters. The quiet confidence, the calm seriousness. He glanced at the trunk. "You've had a long ride." "Yes," she admitted. He lifted the trunk easily as if it weighed nothing. "Let's get you someplace more comfortable." The men on the saloon porch watched silently as Jacob guided Clara toward his horse. He tied her trunk behind the saddle and offered his hand to help her mount. The gesture was respectful, careful. She accepted. The horse started down the road toward the open valley beyond town, leaving behind the curious stares and whispers. Clara looked back once at Red Creek before turning her attention to the man riding beside her. "You came," she said quietly. Jacob gave a small nod. "Of course I did." The ranch sat several miles outside town, tucked into a wide stretch of land where tall grass swayed like waves in the wind. A modest wooden house stood near a red barn with fences stretching toward the distant hills. It wasn't fancy, but it was strong. Clara dismounted slowly, taking in the quiet surroundings. "It's beautiful," she said. Jacob seemed almost relieved to hear that. "I wasn't sure what you'd think." Inside the house, everything was clean but simple. A wooden table near the window, a stone fireplace, a few shelves with carefully stacked supplies. Clara placed her satchel down and turned toward him. "You wrote that you lived alone." "I do." "You weren't worried what people might say about bringing a stranger here?" Jacob shrugged slightly. "People always say something." She smiled faintly. The days that followed settled into a rhythm neither of them expected. Jacob worked long hours tending the cattle and repairing fences while Clara cleaned the house, cooked meals, and slowly made the place feel warmer. She placed small touches around the room's wildflowers in jars, blankets folded neatly over chairs. They spoke more in the evenings. At first the conversations were careful, almost shy. Two strangers learning the edges of each other's lives. Clara told stories about the small town she left behind, about her father's bookstore and the long winters she spent reading beside the stove. Jacob listened quietly. When he spoke about his past, his words were fewer. He had grown up riding the range, working ranches across 3 states before finally buying his own piece of land in Red Creek Valley. "I wanted something steady," he said one evening. Clara understood that feeling more than she expected. Weeks passed. One afternoon, while Jacob was repairing a fence near the road, 3 riders approached the ranch. Clara noticed them first from the window, the same men from the saloon. Her heart sank. They dismounted without asking permission and walked toward the house. Clara stepped outside, keeping her voice calm. "Can I help you?" The crooked, grinned man smiled again. "We came to see if you'd settled in." She stood her ground. "You should leave." One of them laughed. "Or what?" Before Clara could answer, hoofbeats thundered across the field. Jacob rode hard toward the house, his horse kicking up dust. He didn't slow until he reached the porch. The men turned. Jacob slid from the saddle slowly. "I believe I made myself clear in town." The crooked, grinned man shrugged. "Ain't doing nothing wrong." Jacob stepped closer, his expression calm but unyielding. "You're trespassing." The wind shifted through the grass. For a long moment no one moved. Then the men mounted their horses again. "Fine," the leader muttered. "But this ain't over." They rode away in a cloud of dust. Clara let out the breath she'd been holding. Jacob turned to her. "You all right?" She nodded. "Thank you." He looked out toward the road where the riders disappeared. They won't stop easy. That evening they sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the hills. Clara spoke first. "You didn't have to defend me like that." Jacob leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Yes, I did." She looked at him, surprised. "You came all this way," he said quietly. "You trusted me enough to start a life here." The prairie wind rustled the tall grass around them. No one threatens what's under my protection. Clara felt warmth rise in her chest at the words. Weeks later the trouble returned, worse than before. Late one night the sound of horses shattered the quiet. Jacob stepped outside with his rifle as flames suddenly burst near the barn where someone had thrown a torch. 3 riders circled the ranch. Clara grabbed a bucket and ran for the well while Jacob fired a warning shot into the air. "Leave now," he shouted. Instead they charged. What followed happened fast. Jacob moved like someone who had faced danger many times before. Calm, focused. He drove the riders back toward the road, while Clara smothered the flames spreading along the barn wall. Within minutes, the attackers fled into the darkness. The ranch stood silent again, except for the crackling of burned wood. Clara walked toward Jacob slowly. "You saved everything." He shook his head. "We saved it." She looked up at him under the starlight. "Why did you really send for a mail order bride?" Jacob hesitated before answering. "Because I was tired of being alone." The honesty in his voice surprised her. Clara smiled gently. "Then it's a good thing I came." He smiled too small, but real. In that quiet moment beneath the endless western sky, the danger seemed far away. 2 strangers who had once been connected only by letters now stood side by side, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together.